Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Adam Edwards. I'm the Secretariat Manager of the ANU Climate Change Institute and the Energy Change Institute. And we're privileged today to have Helen Locher here. Helen's been in Canberra for a few days, visiting from
Hobart.
She's been visiting the Crawford School and is a co-supervisor of one PhD student?
Yes.
Or multiple?
One.
Just one, okay. So we're quite lucky to have Helen here to present to this small group, but on behalf of the ANU Energy Change Institute. Helen is with Hydro Tasmania, owned by the Tasmanian government. She's a principal consultant in sustainability and obviously development. And she's here to talk to us about the usefulness of voluntary tools in environmental impact, environmental assessment.
And social.
And social assessment as well. So I welcome Helen.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I've worked with the hydro industry for about 18 years or so, and initially in Tasmania, trying to get better social and environmental outcomes from the Hydro Tasmania system, and in the last 7 or 8 years working internationally with other hydro industries, trying to see just collectively how we share experiences and get better social and environmental outcomes by taking a more sustainability-based look at projects and operations. So I want to talk to you about this particular sectoral approach. It's a voluntary tool that's been developed, an assessment framework based on agreed criteria important to hydropower sustainability. Okay. So the context is particularly amongst the energy generation options, hydropower has many positive impacts. It's the largest renewable energy option. And it can have a number of value adds in terms of regional development outcomes if attention is paid to those. Many multiple uses can arise from hydropower, but on the negative side, unless the social and environmental implications are well managed, you can have some very negative examples in the industry. So just a picture of where we have installed hydropower globally and generation, and then where the potential looms. There's potential to double generation by 2050, largely in South America, Africa, and Asia. And the pace of development is very rapid in these countries. I think the developed countries have learned a lot from the experience of hydro development and are really trying to find ways to share those learnings and get as positive an outcome from these hydro developments as possible. This is a very challenging thing to do in some of these developing country contexts. So the areas of potential concern around environment, impacts on habitat, species, water quality, erosion, many examples of social concerns. They need very careful management, resettlement due to creation of reservoirs or changes to river systems. Indigenous peoples, these schemes are often developed in rural and remote areas. Cultural heritage, health, livelihoods, labor. Hydropower has very high upfront costs, and there's a lot of attention on who are the beneficiaries of the economic benefits, who gets the financial returns and who pays those economic costs. In many areas, there have been concerns around the governance of hydropower developments. How transparent are the decisions being made? How well managed are the risks? And just ethical concerns around who's getting the contracts and where the money's going. And then safety and technical concerns. So there's a bit of quite a suite that needs to be thought about. There are some very extreme cases with intense conflicts over dams, and whilst there are many hydropower developments that go under the radar, just deliver what they were designed to do, I think these are the ones that can paint the profile of the whole sector in the public mind. So the hydro industry is quite motivated to avoid these case studies, these cases. In the late 90s, early 2000, concerns about those adverse cases, and particularly World Bank funding of some of these cases, led to creation of a World Commission on Dams. So this was an independent review of the whole dam sector. And they concluded that too often water infrastructure projects have been developed at an unacceptable cost. This really shook up the industry, and the industry needed to give some sort of response to this. So there have been several initiatives globally addressing these issues. The International Energy Agency has been trying to improve the information base on dams and hydropower, social and environmental concerns for decades. They have an implementing agreement on hydro technologies. The World Commission on Dams, 2-year initiative, but really, I think, quite a pivot point for the whole sector. That was followed up by a UNEP initiative to try to roll out the findings of the World Commission on Dams, but without really high impact, unfortunately. I think the one I really want to focus on, and probably the main thing that's been happening, has been within the industry itself. This is International Hydropower Association, and in response to the World Commission on Dams, they acknowledged issues of concerns and produced sustainability guidelines for their members. And initially an assessment protocol to look at how well projects are meeting these guidelines. But this is what has taken hold going forward. It's become a little bit disconnected from the guidelines, which really need updating. The industry developed this assessment framework itself for a number of years, but then in 2008, a Multi-Sectoral Forum was created. Jamie Piddock can take huge credit for helping initiate this, to review with the industry what's in this assessment framework and try to get an assessment framework for the industry that really captures the views and concerns of a wide range of sectors, not just the industry view on it. So that forum operated for a couple years. I was coordinator of this forum, seconded from Hydro Tasmania, so that's why I have some insights on this topic today. And since 2010, we've been using this tool, so I can give you some feedback about how this tool has played out, if it's achieving what it was designed to achieve. So this is a bit about the forum. That we had China and Zambia as developing country representatives. We had Norway, Germany, and Iceland as developed country representatives, and they were the major donors to the forum. Some environmental NGOs, WWF and the Nature Conservancy, some social NGOs, Transparency International and Oxfam, some commercial banks represented by the Equator Principles financial institutions, and development banks represented by the World Bank, who is an observer on the forum, and IHA is the industry representative. The forum operated for several years. It operated by consensus, which was pretty remarkable because going into this process, these groups held highly polarized views on how things were being done and what mattered and what industry should aim for. The process of development of this assessment framework, the protocol was accompanied by field trials all over the world and some major consultation programs to try to get as broad outreach as possible. And it learned a lot from the experience of the World Commission on Dams. So tried to replicate aspects of that worked well, and tried to do better where there were some shortfalls. For example, the World Commission on Dams guidelines were never subject to trials or field data, so this was something really important we wanted to include in this forum process. So this is what the protocol looks like. Sorry, that's a bit fuzzy, but it's a set of documents a background document, and then assessment tools for different project lifecycle stages, because the issues have some variation depending where you are. And different actors participate to differing degrees at different stages. For example, the banks were very keen on an implementation stage tool because that's where they have the most involvement. And the assessment tools are designed to guide decision makings at the end of that stage that would help inform the readiness for that project to move into the next stage of the development cycle. Each assessment tool has a set of approximately 20 topics. The preparation stage 1 has almost 25. I think operation has about 19. Each topic is scored individually, and they roughly cover these categories. You can argue over, if downstream flow should be environmental or whatever, but it's just trying to get a holistic perspective on all of the material considerations that these different sectors agreed needed to be taken into account. Within each topic, there are criteria used as the base for scoring. I'll show you a picture of this, but how well that topic was assessed, how well it's being managed, how well stakeholders pertinent to that particular topic are being engaged, how well they support process and outcomes on that topic, how well the project is conforming with the plans relevant to that topic and to the meeting compliance obligations, and what are the outcomes. Not every topic has every criteria, so that's been very carefully thought through in this forum process. And then there are themes that come through. They were very important to many of the forum members, and they don't necessarily appear in topic names, but they're cross-cutting, so they are picked up in the wording of criteria or in the assessment guidance on what to take into consideration on some of the topics. This is what a topic looks like. So financial viability, you have some statements of intent, agreed statements by all the sectors of what would you like a project to be exhibiting, in this case in the area of financial viability. Then scoring levels from 1 to 5, but it's a bimodal scoring approach. So these criteria here for finance, we just have 4 of them. There's statements of what one would look for if looking for basic good practice. In the first instance, what is any company, no matter how small, developing country, developed country, basic responsible approach? What would you look for? And then if all of those are met, one would look at are proven best practice statements met. And scores are assigned based on gaps. So if there's a gap against basic good practice, it's a score of 2. If there's more than one gap, you get a score of 1. If you meet all of those, then if you meet all these statements, you get a score of 5. If you miss one or more of those components, you get a 4. If you miss 1, you get a 4. If you miss more than 1, you get a 3. So the assessor needs to determine significant gaps. There's a bit of subjectivity around this, but it's quite an achievement to get agreement on what all projects would need to achieve just as basic good practice, and then what is a best outcome that could be aimed for. Not idealistic, it needed to be proven that it could be achieved. The protocol topics have assessment guidance, so definitions of some of the key terms and examples. For example, here issues and risks might include some of these things. And then the assessment process it's evidence-based. So it has examples of people you would interview to get verbal evidence, and examples of documents you would look at to get documentary evidence, plus there's visual evidence. So the assessor looks to triangulate evidence to try to get a diversity of views on that topic from different sectoral views, look at how consistent what people are saying are with what's documented and with what they observe. So these are just some examples of basic good practice statements. This P is the preparation tool. So P3 is demonstrated need and strategic fit topic. That the strategic fit of the project with needs for water and energy services and relevant policies and plans can be demonstrated. You know, it's not inconsistent. P5, environmental and social plans avoid, minimize, and mitigate negative impacts with no significant gaps. P11 is economic viability, that a net benefit can be demonstrated. The assessment guidance says that can be in qualitative or quantitative terms. P13 is project-affected communities and livelihoods, and that at basic good practice, these should be improved compared to pre-disturbance. P16 is labor, and that there's consistency with internationally recognized labor rights. P23 is downstream flow regimes, not environmental flows. A lot of discussion was around that in many countries, social have as large a need as environmental, and that really these should be looking for that whatever the downstream flows are, they should be taking into account diversity of objectives. And these are just selected criteria. So something like downstream flows, this is the management criteria about plans, but there would also be criteria about stakeholder engagement, about outcomes, about how it was assessed. So what is this protocol tool? It's an assessment tool applicable to all stages of hydro development and designed for a global context. It's evidence-based, assessed by an accredited assessor. Each topic is scored relative on a framework of basic good and proven best practice. The framework helps synthesize a really complex array of information into something uniform, and I think this has been a huge contribution that the terminology and the concepts are shared and understood globally in a consistent manner, and experiences. And there's a governance framework for this. The forum rolled on to create a governance council that oversees this protocol. So it's not a standard, it's not a pass-fail. The stakeholders involved in the forum were really keen on this, that they had differing perceptions of what a project should aim for. And it was a very difficult thing to produce agreement on every project must meet this. So what the protocol provides is a pathway to continuous improvement, and different organizations would want to see different performance according to their own ideas of what they believe should be done. It doesn't give any sort of certification or stamp of approval. It's not trying to replace national or regulatory requirements, but to supplement them or provide another lens on those. It's certainly not meant to replace environmental impact assessments or environmental and social impact assessments. So it's one thing only. It's just an assessment framework, and it's voluntary. Some of the resources that have been set up to help its implementation. We have a website, www.hydrosustainability.org. There you can download these documents. There's a charter and terms and conditions of use, and there are a number of published assessments that you can look at. This is what the council looks like. It's modeled on some other councils. There's the Sustainable Palm Oil one and something, a biofuels roundtable. The idea is that there are sectoral chambers. In this case, there's environmental, social, governments, industry, consultants, and service providers, for example. Each one has elected representatives that sit on a governance committee, and so this is a multi-sectoral committee, and they operate by consensus. The International Hydropower Association is supporting this as a management entity. So they do a lot of the administration for this governance committee, and as needed, some working groups are set up. Accredited assessors are individuals. They have to go through a training course and a certain experience requirements to be able to use the protocol in an official capacity. They need to be qualified lead auditors, and they're licensed. That license can be taken away if there are any concerns. There are only about 10 in the world so far. The demand hasn't really grown yet. It's a bit early days still rolling this out. This is, IHA, the International Hydropower Association. To start, what was really important with this process was to get industry feeling they owned and bought into it, because it's a voluntary tool. Industry did not respond favorably to the World Commission on Dams outputs, and that was a real disadvantage because there's a lot of great guidance out of the World Commission on Dams. Industry took reaction to certain components of that, and so didn't give it its full support. To make this effective, it was seen industry really needs to be promoting it within the industry itself. The strong performers need to be putting peer pressure on those who need to lift their game a bit. So these are the companies that have applied it so far, and this is the countries, these blue dots. So that's a pretty good start for 3 years. This is, in addition to assessments, those companies have undertaken training, so just building capacity and exposure to understand what's in this thing. There are a lot of new ideas for some companies around livelihoods and economic displacement and labor rights and things. So just working with it has been quite important. So the yellow shows where training has taken place, and the blue where assessments have taken place. These are assessments to date since the protocol was first rolled out in 2010 up until the end of last year. There's a good cross-country representation. Just about every continent is represented on there, though I'm not sure we have Africa yet. We have done trials in Africa, but not assessments since it was finalized. We have some large, I think the largest 3,750 megawatts and down to 3 megawatts, and different stages. The early stage tool has not had as much use to date. It's not actually a scoring tool, it's more a guidance document. So that is getting quite a bit of attention on how to roll that out more. So just some pictures of the results of assessments. So each score on each topic at the highest level is presented as this spidergram or a radar plot, with 5 being on the outside. And these are the IHA sustainability partners and the first users tend to be the companies that feel fairly confident in the standards they're performing at, and they really want to just test whether they are operating at a level consistent with what the protocol is seen as very high performance. So, 4s, 5s, the occasional 3, and I think a lot of the early assessments are showing similar patterns to this. This is the range of scores across all assessments. So if you look just at what the lowest performing one is, you can see that there's really quite a diversity in the type of results that are being found. The lower performers are less attracted to this tool. So that's a bit unfortunate. They're largely in developing country contexts, and there are a number of reasons for that, but one of them is that this is a very information intensive process, and they don't necessarily manage information and have it available in quite the way that some of the developed countries are used to doing. The whole idea of auditing isn't so familiar. Just some some observations across all the assessments that things the high performers consistently show are very good baseline information to inform their management planning and their activities. Good quality management systems, good information monitoring and response, references to international standards, so these companies are quite tuned in to not just this kind of standard, but like ISO 14001 for environmental management, etc. Transparency and engagement is more the norm. Good corporate and public sector governance frameworks and strong executive commitment. These other things can be in place, but if the executive isn't really keen on promotion or outreach, just not quite so visible in the standards the project is exhibiting. Challenges needing extra attention by all. This is even the high performers where they do tend to dip. Communications. The first topic is called communications and consultation, and in the forum process we debated a lot. Is that a topic, or is it just something you kind of put into every, somewhere in your scoring criteria across other topics? But we've found actually it has been really insightful to have it as a standalone topic. And the stronger the commitment and the frameworks for communications, often the better the ability of the company to anticipate risks and manage those, and to have strong stakeholder support, plus its own internal efficiencies and coordination. Cumulative impacts, third-party impacts on a project, always really difficult. This tool just assesses a single project, so there's a lot of debate over who deals with these. Biodiversity and ecosystems. This is a very tough one for the hydro industry. What do you aim for? These projects fundamentally change landscapes, and the ecosystems are not going to be the same as they were. So what is acceptable? What is a healthy, functional, viable ecosystem? I think this is an area where still there's a bit to learn and share amongst the industry on how can this be managed as well as possible. Indigenous relations. This is a pretty hot and sensitive topic for the industry. Benefit sharing mechanisms. So how do those profits and revenues get distributed? Are they all going into the corporation itself? Are they going into a central government for the government to decide how to disperse those? Or are there some mechanisms for those communities in the project affected area to really see something out of the project on an ongoing basis? There's a vision for this protocol that it's accepted and used by all shareholder or stakeholder groups to the hydro sector as the primary tool for measuring and guiding sustainability. So within that, they working on getting it widely implemented with examples of application and training, that the effective governance structure, quality systems, particularly with assessors, and that it's financially viable. This has been a tough one because it's been supported by donors and it can't really stand on its feet yet. So how long do you go with that? If it has, they would like to charge for assessments and have some money be coming back into this management structure, but then you need a certain number of assessments to maintain that. And because most of the projects being undertaken are in developing countries and they're not quite buying into this as much as developed countries, this is a challenge, how to make it stand on its own financial feet. Has been widely endorsed. The World Bank has reviewed it and has identified lessons learned and recommendations. OECD document common approaches. IIED is the International Institute for Environment and Development. WWF, Citibank is one of the equator banks. ICPDR is the Danube River Commission, and E.ON is a hydro company. So it's starting to get noticed and evaluated by a number of institutions, and has been viewed favorably, but with caveats that still need to roll it out and work on it a bit. So my own reflections, having been part of its development and implementation, is that I think that the forum that came together with the multiple sectors and agreed on a framework was really a landmark process, because this sector was very divisive and there was no common language for them to discuss divisive issues. They just didn't come together very well. So to produce a consensus product was pivotal for ongoing scrutiny of this sector. The industry ownership has been really important. So industry is pushing industry to pay attention to this. I really like that it aligns this understanding of concepts, terminology, approaches, and performance. I think this is of huge value. Like during the forum process, each forum member or sector was intended to have a reference group. Some were more effective than others, these reference groups, but the IHA had an industry reference group that brought together companies from all over the world to look at what would go into this protocol. And the conversations were like, a consultation forum. What do they mean, a consultation forum? No, we don't need that. And another company saying, oh no, it's no problem. We use that all the time. You just do this and this and this. So there was this normalizing of practice. And if you only listen to one company's reaction, you can get a lot of negatives. But if the sector can talk amongst itself and just normalize expectations, then you can get more positive and consistent views. It definitely will benefit from further application and learning from experience. I think that that scoring, gradation, and the calibration, that was a starting point and an interesting process, but it's imperfect. It will take a bit of time to get a gradation of performance that really reflects well. One of the weaknesses or relative weaknesses is that it's really teasing out the difference at the higher end of performance, but the lower performers, sometimes they can't even find themselves on this ladder of performance. That it's had a lot of inputs, I think, from strong performers, and the developing countries really need to find ways for them to engage with it. And it may be not a scoring framework. It may be just guidance on basic good practice with examples of how to do it and a self-assessment checklist. We also need examples of how it has driven improved performance. So we have some examples of application, but has it affected change? We don't know yet. The ideal is that a project would apply it at each stage, and you would see that issues identified early on were rectified as you move through the project development cycle. So that will come with time. There's a company in Colombia that has set out to apply it at every stage. So that's an amazing commitment, and they're sharing those reports. So it will provide quite a wealth of experience to look at with time. So that's my overview of the protocol, and I'm really happy to answer any questions about this that you might have.